Warning, the following podcast may not be for the faint of heart, because I'm going to tear a big hole in my new bench. Welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker, episode number 35. Gonna start installing my Benchcrafted end vise, and it's gonna hurt. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Renaissance Woodworker. I'm your host, Shannon Rogers, and as my intro alluded to, today we start ripping a big hole in the underside of the RWW benchtop in order to install the Benchcrafted end vise. So I've gotten some comments in the past about how people appreciate the fact that if I make mistakes, I will show it. And I've actually seen and left several of those comments myself on Mark Spagnola's website over at the Wood Whisperer about how I appreciate the fact that he makes mistakes and then he shows us how to fix it. So that's a lot of what this episode's about. I've commented several times that I'm not the fastest of woodworkers. I tend to think things through 4 and 5 times before doing them, but even then I make my share of mistakes. I neglect things, I forget things, or sometimes I'm too cerebral and I overthink things and it comes out as an issue that's got to be fixed later. So you'll start to see why the build of my bench is not progressing as fast as other people might think, because this week I'm actually going to show you all the mistakes that I've made and how I fixed them in just one little install. There's a couple of mistakes so far that you haven't seen yet because they were just kind of silly and easy fixes, but this week I'll show you exactly what I did and what you shouldn't do in order to install an end vise, specifically the Benchcrafted end vise. I also wanted to say that Jamil Abrahams over at Benchcrafted Vise, who makes the vise, is such a brilliant woodworker and such a high level of precision in his work that I think in looking at the instructions that you can download off his website, there were quite a few gaps and there were quite a few questions that I had coming out of it. Now, granted, I think if you think about it a little bit, you can figure out what those steps are. Plus, Jamil also blogged his entire RWW bench build on his Ood website. Not only that, in building his second RWW bench for the Traveling Lee Nielsen show, he's gone into even greater detail on how this vise gets installed. So there's several sources to go step by step, but I wanted to make sure that I really documented every bit of minutia when it comes to installing this vise so that maybe I can help other folks out in the future. So that's what we're going to start. This is probably going to be one of maybe 2, possibly even 3 parts on the installation of this Benchcrafted vise. There's a great deal of detail in this process. It's a very, very precise installation, and we've done a lot of work so far on the bench, and now would be a really bad time to screw it all up. So I want to make sure that anybody who does this in the future is going to have a good resource to reference back to. So without further ado, let's jump back down to the shop. At this point, our bench top is ready to go, and I'm just going to start by routing a tenon onto the end that will eventually fit to a mortise put into the end cap. So let's head on down there. So in this shot you'll actually see that I've already done the bottom part of this tenon. Later I'll go ahead and cut the shoulder square just using a handsaw. But I've got a pretty substantial straight bit in my router, and the first pass I'm going to make here is actually back from the edge. I want to establish the shoulder, and I wanted to just get this cut done to make sure it was nice and square to the rest of the bench. After I complete this cut, I'll actually go back and start from the edge working my way in. You'll find that it's a little, well, it's very unsafe to actually start working your way out and cutting against. You'll have to reverse the direction you push the router and work in what would be more of a traditional climb cut. In this instance, I'll make several passes here. I am dealing with a pretty long bit, so I've got to nibble away at it so I'm not putting too much stress on that long straight bit. And just be pretty careful exiting so you don't get too much tear out.
Hey everybody, if I'm looking a little bit white, that's because I just had a pretty frightening experience with my router here. I've been forming the tongue that's going to hold the end cap, and this is where the Benchcrafted vise is going to go. Went ahead and did one side of it, and then I flipped the bench over and just working with a fence was hogging out this material to form the tongue. Let me show you what's going on. So on the bottom side here, you can see the tongue is already done. Once I flipped the bench over, started working on the top. And you can see I took one cut just to establish the shoulder, and then I moved the fence all the way back out and started working my way back in. And got to this line here, and suddenly my spiral router bit cracked. It broke. And it's not nearly as bad now that it's not spinning anymore, but you can see the base of that has just shattered out. Well, needless to say, it dropped down out of the router bit and torqued to the right. And thank goodness the Festival router I'm using has a dust shroud on it, because the shroud actually caught the bit. And of course, it spun up sparks everywhere as it hit the metal collar plate on the bottom. You can see here on the workpiece what it did. It dropped down into this hole and off to the right and kind of gouged a huge hole in the tenon. Fortunately, this is an integral tenon, and no one's going to see it. And with the majority of the meat I've got in this tenon, I ought to be just fine as far as integrity goes. Probably just for the heck of it, I'll go ahead and fill it with this little pile of shavings I've got here. But my heart is basically still in my throat at this point, so I think I'm going to come back to the hand tools here and finish knocking this section out just using my mortise chisel. And as you can see, I've gone ahead and knocked all this out, and I'll just go over it and flush it with a shoulder plane. So just goes to show you, no matter how much you're planning, sometimes the tools give it on you. This is a very, very high quality solid carbide spiral bit. Just I don't know what happened. It cracked and broke, and thank goodness the dust collection. I did have all my eye protection, everything on, so it's perfectly safe. But you know, bit's spinning at 6,000, 8,000 RPMs, and suddenly it comes loose. So I'm going to take a break for a second and then come back and tackle this with my chisel. Okay, I'm going to take some of this thick CA glue by Titebond, and I'm going to drop it in the hole made by the router bit. And I'll go back over it with the thin stuff. This really seeps down into the cracks. Give it a little shot of accelerant. And watch it boil to a cure. Actually, it dripped down the face, and now I've got a little stalactite there. I'll just clean that up. Alright. So, now I'm just going to go over this with a shoulder plane and clean up the tenon, get it to a uniform thickness all the way across. And we will move on to laying out the cavity for the Benchcrafted vise. Hey everybody, got the tongue laid out on my bench, and I'm about to get started on excavating the cavity for my in vise. And one thing I will recommend is be very, very clear in labeling, you know, the bottom and the top and the front and the back. And I've gone so far as to actually write on the bottom, this is the bottom of the bench is facing up, to write, I want my in vise here, I want my leg vise there. Because with you constantly flipping it upside down and moving around, you can very easily get confused as to where things go. Remember, I'm a southpaw, so my leg vise is actually going to be on, you know, the opposite side of the bench. That is the right side of the bench. A little bit different from what most people have seen. And as I'm following the installation instructions for the Benchcrafted vise, Jamil was right-handed as well. So, you know, looking at the pictures kind of can mislead you a little bit if you're doing a left-hand vise installation. So just be doubly sure, label the bench, in vise goes here, the leg vise goes here, this is the bottom, etc. I've gone ahead and laid out everything, and actually for the purposes of being able to see it on the video, I used a small Sharpie marker. And one of the things I'll recommend in doing this installation is once you take the template that comes with your installation instructions, go ahead and make just a small hardboard template out of it. It's just easier to work with. You can transfer your lines better. I also took a tip from John 3, I think, over at Lumberjocks, who's also building a Rubo with the Benchcrafted vise. He made a counter template to it. In other words, the opposite pattern, and he used that to kind of run along the groove after he cut it, just to make sure that he had all the clearance required. So I went ahead and made an opposite template that actually will register, you know, against the top and the front of the vise. So if this is the bottom, just like this, I can actually register it in here and run it down that groove in order to determine, you know, am I uniform depth all the way down. So using that template, I was able to mark out the lines here and just put in the X's that this is what I'm excavating. And I transfer those lines all the way down the bench and down the side here as well. The instructions for the vise say that it needs to be at minimum 13 7/8 from the inside of the end cap, which is this line here, because this tongue, the end cap, will butt up right against here. But for maximum travel, it can be 17 3/4. Just to give me a little bit of fudge factor room, I measured down 17 inches from the end cap. That extra 3/4 of an inch, if I went straight to 17 3/4, you know, I might end up with a little bit of extra gap. So I brought it in a little bit. That way I make sure I get a really tight fit on the dog block when it butts up against this edge. And went ahead and used a scratch awl and marking knife and everything in order to kind of score these lines to prevent some tear out.
So this is pretty straightforward. We're using the circular saw just to kind of perforate the bulk of the waist. I've already made really the only precise cut here, and that's right along the shoulder. And I did use a fence to guide that. Unfortunately, I was remiss in getting footage of that. But from here on out, I took, I don't know, 5 or 6 different passes down the length of the cavity just to, as I said, perforate it, turn it into Swiss cheese, and basically ruin all the hard work we put into such a beautiful bench top.
Just a few cuts with the circular saw later, and we've got a nice piece of bench Swiss cheese here. And I'm going to go ahead and knock out this this waist just using a mallet. But I think what I want to do first, just to ensure that I control my edges of my cut, I want to go through it all. I struck lines using an awl and my marking knife along each one of these edges, but what I want to do is just kind of be doubly sure. Excuse me one second. and deepen the lines on the edge here just using my chisel. So real simple. Since I've already scored the top with the awl or cross grain using a knife, I just want to create a small divot right up against that marking line. And you can see as I use my chisel, it drops right up against that line, and now I've got about maybe 1/32 of an inch that is recessed right on that marking line. And now what I can do is knock a bunch of this out just using my mallet. There, and you see it breaks out, but it broke out right on that line, and I didn't get any tear out along there. Let's see if I can get a little bit closer so you can see that. It broke out, and you can see these chips receded all the way back, but they stopped right where that line is, where I had scored it with a knife and then went over it again with a chisel. You can see it really well on the top here too. I've used my chisel to create a small kind of V groove all the way along the edge. And I've done it down along this bottom line as well, so I can just keep kind of hacking away. This stuff just pops out, and I don't have to worry about tearing out that edge. So I'll go ahead and keep knocking some of this stuff out, and then I'll go break out the router and start to refine the shape a little bit better. Mortar steel chisel. Need a little persuasion here. Now one thing, pretty specific here. Now granted, we are looking at the bottom of the bench, so if you bruise the edge, it's not the end of the world, but just as a matter of practice, when you're working with a mortising chisel and leveraging like this, I've got the flat face against the non-waste side, and if I were to pry this piece out by twisting in this direction, I am going to end up bruising this corner right here. So, I mean, if this were a piece of furniture and this was a show piece, I definitely don't want to leverage against that. It's a matter of pulling it forward like that and leveraging it that way so we're not bruising this edge. This is actually the knifed edge. And you can see just how clean that edge is, because I did go through with a scratch hole and went pretty deep on it and then did those little back cuts using a chisel. It's definitely, on this scale, it's definitely a great reason to have a couple of those 2-inch wide chisels like I was just using earlier. So really, from here, let's just remove this last little piece. Okay. Now obviously this is really rough, as you can tell. I've still got quite a bit down here I need to remove, but since I used a circular saw, obviously you can see the curvature of the saw there, but I've taken a large portion of it out. There's quite a bit of meat right here in the middle that needs to come out of the belly of that curve, but I don't have to spend so much time going over it with a router. So we're back here at the bench, and maybe because it's Friday and it's been a very long week and I've got some aggression to work out, you may not everybody's going to have one of these 7-sweep 760 millimeter gouges. This is a big gouge. I use this actually for hollowing Windsor chair seats. Not everyone's going to have something like this, but if you do, it's a great way to go ahead and continue refining this curve, because actually the 7-sweep almost perfectly matches the outer curve of this. It's just a little bit off. This curve is a little bit flatter than this, so I suppose if I went to a number 6 sweep or something like that, I would probably match it well. But again, I'm just going to try to waste away some of this wood. So starting back here, did a really nice job of normally a gouge like this you want to work against the grain. It works really well in this direction, but you know, this is probably not the intended use of most of these tools for hogging out large pieces like this, but it's just one more way of working out some end of the week aggression, if you will. So take a look over here on the end, get a better feel for this kerf right there being the absolute bottom of the line where it needs to go. So I'm moving it out nicely. It took a large bulk of it out here. So I think I'll keep wasting a little way in the middle, but ultimately you can see this gouge I created earlier. It's going to be really helpful for referencing in here and determining, you know, how close am I. And you can see, you know, we're pretty close to the curve, but you know, this gap right in here shows you how much deeper we really have to go in order to get it to truly reference against that face. Now we're ready to start routing out the majority of the cavity here. What I've got for my router setup, first and foremost, is this piece here is just 2 of the laminate pieces that will go in front of the vise. And I've taken just a piece of 3/4 inch scrap and wedged it in there. This is actually where the the dog block is going to go. Now the dog block is going to be quite a bit thicker, but when I actually sandwiched my dog block in there, I ended up with such a wide gap in here that the fence rods on my my router just I couldn't get good support. What would happen is I would bring the router over, and if this space here was much wider, I was falling off the edge, you can see here, and I wasn't getting very good support. So rather than trying to come up with something really complicated and build another jig to provide support, I just narrowed this gap in here. So now I've got full support of the router. It's resting on both the main part of the bench and the front laminates all the way down the groove here. And then just by adjusting the fence in, I'll be able to move out and increase my depth and go through the curve here. Over here in the front is just a couple pieces of scrap that I've blue taped in place just to provide support of the router, so I'm not falling off the edge onto this this tongue down here. And just further back on the bench, I just went ahead and clamped it all together to get it nice and firm. It is imperative that I'm referencing off this laminate, and that this laminate be pressed up tight against the fence so that I'm getting a parallel face on the inside of this cavity. That's going to be imperative for the vise movement. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and start routing. So it wouldn't be a good project without a small screw up, and I was working my way down this curve here and setting the depth as I went, and I forgot to lock the depth stop. So as I plunged down, I exceeded my depth and went right through my line. You can see the line should go right across that way, and I went down too deep. So simple little fix, using a 1/2 inch bit, and I know that this is exactly a 1/2 inch wide, so milled up a piece of leftover ash, and I actually chiseled that in square down there. This ash slides nicely and snugly into that little cavity. I'll glue that in there, let it set up, and I can start over and reroute that cavity. Okay, the clamps are off and the repair is in place. I've gone ahead and taken off the extra support here on the tongue and moved the front laminate piece out of the way. I've got as much routed, I think, as what I'm going to do. Obviously you can see there's still quite a bit sticking up here from where that repair went in, but if you take a close look right at that edge, you can see it's a pretty seamless repair. And again, this doesn't have to be pretty. This is the bottom side of the bench, and the vise and everything will be kind of installed on top of this. But I just think from an integrity perspective, I wanted more meat in this section instead of just this little tiny spot left there just for the tenon. What I'm going to do from here is actually finish shaping the entire thing by hand. And if you look right down here on the edge where I'm really close to the line, you can start to see the curve forming. I've already done some work there with one of those little microplane rasps. And I actually picked one of those up on sale at Woodcraft a while ago and really haven't had a chance to use it, but I think I got it for like $10. This is a phenomenal tool. It feels like it was completely customized for this particular bench installation. In fact, let me get it and show you in case you're not sure what I'm talking about. This is the tool I'm referring to, and it's much like a rasp or a Sureform rasp, but there's a lot of tiny little hand planes, really. So it creates shavings and not dust. I've got the curved piece on here. You can also buy it in a flat piece, and I've really just been working it like this along this line and kind of blending together all those little steps from the router, and it's doing an incredible job. Obviously I know I'm going to run into issues when I run right up against here, but I'll tackle that with a carving chisel and just my bench chisels to go straight down this edge. But the majority of the wasting is now done, so let me go ahead and refine that curve, and we'll move on to the next step.
So it's back to rasping, and with the curved shape on the bottom of this rasp, it was really able to very closely mimic the curve I had laid out on the edge of the bench. The hardest part was actually just moving that inlay I had put in. In order to get right up into the corner, I just took a number one sweep, a couple of number one sweep gouges, and just kind of refined that curve just a little bit. These are really just the spots that I wasn't able to get using that microplane rasp. Again, working with that gouge, I was able to chip out that inlay that came in, that I put in, and I really got a very nice smooth finish on the whole thing between using the rasp and the carving gouges.
All right, that'll do it. We have the entire cavity wasted away, and using this template I mentioned earlier, reference it right against there. It's not designed to be an absolute perfect fit, but what I'm looking for is, am I getting any interference as I slide this down? And as you can see, very good fit. And I've got a nice square shoulder down here on the end. So we're all set to go ahead and start gluing up the front laminates to this in the dog block. And when we come back, we'll be fitting the end cap.